Swarm of danger, a German Shepherd's fight against killer bees, a deadly swarm, a heroic police dog, a fight for survival that no one saw coming. But when all hope seemed lost, what happened next left everyone speechless. The dense jungle pulsed with life as the late afternoon sun dipped behind towering canopies, casting long shadows over the thick undergrowth. The humid air clung to every surface, rich with the scent of damp earth and the sharp tang of wild vegetation. Birds called to one another from the treetops, their cries blending with the distant murmur of a river winding through the wilderness. Lone figure moved through the tangled foliage, silent and determined. A German Shepherd, powerful and alert, navigated the uneven terrain with precision. His coat, a mix of deep tan and black, shimmered with sweat from the oppressive heat. His name was Rex, and he was no ordinary dog. He had been trained for moments like this. He had spent years learning how to track, how to sense danger before it appeared, how to survive in conditions most wouldn't dare enter. But today, something in the air felt different. His ears twitched at the distant rustle of leaves, his keen nose sniffing the air for any trace of what lay ahead. Somewhere behind him, far beyond his current position, his handler, Officer Mark, would be waiting, trusting him to find a safe path. They had been together since Rex was a pup, partners, brothers, in a way that only those who had walked through fire together could understand. But right now Rex was alone. The jungle had always been unpredictable, but today it was unsettlingly quiet. Too quiet. The usual hum of insects seemed distant, the normal chatter of birds subdued. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Rex slowed his pace, his powerful frame lowering into a cautious stance. Something wasn't right. His muscles tensed, ready for whatever lay ahead. His instincts had never failed him before, and they screamed at him now. Something was coming. A sudden, sharp movement overhead made his ears snap toward the canopy. A flock of birds erupted from the trees in a chaotic frenzy, their wings beating wildly against the thick air. It wasn't normal flight behavior. They were fleeing, but from what? Rex's breath quickened. His sharp mind ran through the possibilities. A predator, a human, something else. He had no way of knowing, but one thing was certain. He had to move. Just as he took his next step, his broad shoulders brushed against a low-hanging branch. It was a small movement, one that barely made a sound in the grand scheme of the jungle. But to the inhabitants of the hidden hive nestled within, it was an act of war. A deep, vibrating hum filled the air, growing from a distant murmur to an all-consuming roar in a matter of seconds. Rex froze. His ears flicked toward the sound, his nose catching a sudden, bitter scent, alarm pheromones. Then they came. Like a living storm, the honeybees erupted from their hive in a furious wave of gold and black, their tiny bodies moving as one relentless force. The air shook with the sheer volume of their attack, 1,000 wings beating in unison, their rage focused entirely on the intruder who had disturbed their home. The first sting landed just below Rex's ear, sharp, searing. A second later, another punctured the sensitive skin on his snout, then his flank, then his neck. Pain exploded through his body. He yelped, shaking his head violently, snapping at the swarm that surrounded him. But there were too many. The buzzing grew deafening. His powerful muscles tensed as he turned, trying to outrun the onslaught. But the bees were relentless. They clung to his fur, their stingers piercing deep, venom seeping into his bloodstream. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony coursing through his body. Rex had fought before, against wild animals, against armed criminals, but this was something else entirely. He needed to think. He needed to move. But where? His vision blurred at the edges, his body betraying him as the venom spread. His legs felt heavier, his breathing grew ragged. Was this how it ended? Alone, deep in the jungle, falling to something as small as bees? No, somewhere in the depths of his mind, through the haze of pain, instinct fought back. He forced his legs to move, his paws pounding against the damp earth as he bolted through the undergrowth. His only chance was distance. If he could get far enough away, maybe, just maybe, the swarm would disperse. Then through the piercing pain he heard it, the distant roar of rushing water. A river. A sliver of hope ignited inside him. If he could just reach it, if he could throw himself into the water, maybe he could shake them off. His lungs burned, his powerful legs struggling beneath him, but he pushed forward. His ears flicked back, the swarm was still following. Faster. The jungle blurred around him, his heart pounding with a mix of pain and sheer determination. Almost there. And then, his paws slipped. The world tilted. His momentum carried him forward, too fast to stop. The ground beneath him disappeared, and for a split second, he was weightless. Then, impact. He tumbled down a steep incline, his body rolling uncontrollably, branches snapping beneath him as he plunged toward the unseen river below. The pain was momentarily forgotten as his body twisted through the air, gravity pulling him mercilessly downward. With a final, bone-jarring crash, he hit the ground hard. The jungle was spinning, the buzzing had stopped, but so had everything else. He tried to move, but his limbs refused. His breath was shallow, his body numb. Above him, the bees, their rage spent, slowly dispersed into the canopy. The threat was gone, but Rex lay motionless. Far in the distance, through the thick walls of trees and vines, the sound of human voices echoed, calling, searching. Officer Mark. Hope was near. But was it enough? Rex's fight for survival had only just begun. The jungle floor was cold against Rex's trembling body. Every breath was a battle, every movement an impossible effort. His powerful legs, once swift, once unyielding, felt like they no longer belonged to him. His fur, thick and proud, now clung to his aching frame, damp with sweat and venom. The key. World around him wavered, the towering trees swaying as if lost in a storm. But the storm was inside him. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, racing against time. Somewhere beyond the haze of pain, he knew Mark was out there, looking for him, waiting for him. Rex whimpered softly, a sound barely louder than the rustling. Leaves. He had never been weak, never been helpless, but today the jungle had brought him to his knees. With a strained inhale, he forced his front paw forward. An inch. Another. His claws scraped against the damp soil, but his body screamed in protest. His muscles were locking up, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Just a little more. Just one more step. But as he moved, the fire in his veins surged, and the world tilted once more. His vision darkened, his body slumping against the earth. Would Mark ever find him? Would he even be able to get back up? Inside Rex's body, the venom worked relentlessly, spreading like wildfire. Each sting had been a dagger, and now they were thousands. His heart pounded in his chest, frantic and erratic. His mouth felt dry, his tongue thick and heavy. The jungle's scents, once so sharp, were slipping away. He had always relied on his nose, his greatest tool, his strongest gift. But now the world smelled like nothing, like emptiness. Panic clawed at his fading mind. He had to move, had to find shelter. But his body was betraying him. A rustling in the distance, a flicker of sound. His ears twitched, but his head was too heavy to lift. Was something coming? Or was the jungle preparing to swallow him whole? Then, faint but undeniable, he heard it. A soft, steady murmur, a familiar rhythm in the distance. Water. The river. A spark of instinct cut through the haze. Water meant salvation. It could cool his burning skin, wash away the venom, slow the poison in his blood. But it was far. And he was failing. With a deep, shaky breath, Rex pushed his front paw forward. Then the next. It wasn't running, it wasn't even walking, it was crawling, but it was movement. The jungle pushed back against him, twisting roots, thick vines, branches that clawed at his fur. His claws scraped against stone, slipping, stumbling, but he pressed on, because if he stopped, it would be the end. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack was over. The swarm had left him. The jungle fell into silence. No more buzzing, no more stings, but no relief either. Rex's swollen eyes fluttered open, blinking against the pain. He had to keep moving. He had to reach the river, but as he took another shaky step, his paws slipped. The ground gave way. Beneath him, he tumbled forward, his body collapsing against the damp earth. The river was close, so close, but now it might as well have been a world away. His breathing slowed. The jungle blurred. The pain faded. Then, somewhere in the distance, a voice. Liam raised a hand, stopping his patrol team in their tracks. "Did you hear that?" The others froze, their ears straining in the thick silence. Then it came again, a faint, pained whimper. It wasn't just any animal, it was a dog, and not just any dog, a trained one. "Over there!" One of the team members pointed toward the dense undergrowth. Liam's heart pounded as they pushed forward, moving fast. Time was running out. Liam was the first to see him. The sight made his stomach twist. Rex lay sprawled on the ground, barely breathing. His fur was swollen, his face nearly unrecognizable from the stings. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Liam knelt beside him, placing a careful hand on the dog's side. "He's in bad shape," he muttered. "We need to move now." One of the medics rushed forward, opening a first aid kit. "The venom's spreading fast. If we don't act now, he won't make it." Liam clenched his jaw. Rex was still alive. But for how much longer? Without hesitation, Liam pulled a small vial from his pack, a rapid antihistamine. "Hold him still," he instructed. The needle pierced Rex's skin, injecting the medicine into his bloodstream. The German Shepard barely reacted. A medic unscrewed a canteen, pouring cool water over Rex's swollen face. Dirt and venom washed away, revealing the exhaustion beneath. Liam leaned closer, his voice low but urgent. "Come on, boy. Stay with us." Rex let out a long, shuddering breath. Then, slowly, his eyes flickered open. Liam stood, scanning the jungle. The outpost was an hour away, too far. The nearest hospital, even worse. "We can't carry him that far," one of the medics said. "If he doesn't get an IV soon, he won't make it." Liam's fists clenched. He had a decision to make. Risk carrying him through the jungle, hoping they could move fast enough, or call for an emergency airlift, something that could take longer but might be his only real chance. He looked down at Rex. The dog's breathing was weak, but he was still fighting. Liam took a deep breath. There was no room for hesitation. "We're not losing him," he said, his voice firm. He turned to his team. "Call for an emergency airlift, now." The rhythmic chop of the helicopters, rotors echoed through the jungle, stirring the dense foliage below. Dust and leaves swirled into the air as the rescue team worked swiftly, their movements precise yet urgent. Liam knelt beside Rex, pressing a steady hand against the dog's trembling body. His once mighty companion, a K9 officer trained for endurance and loyalty, now lay limp on the makeshift stretcher. The venom had drained him, his fur damp with sweat and dirt, his breaths shallow. Liam's throat tightened. "Hang in there, buddy," he murmured. For a moment there was nothing, only the heavy silence of waiting. Then a flicker, a twitch of an ear. Rex's swollen eyelids struggled to lift, revealing a glimpse of the once intense brown eyes, now dulled with pain. Liam felt his chest tighten with hope. "That's it," he whispered, his grip tightening around Rex's paw. "You're a fighter, and we're not giving up on you." The moment the helicopter touched down in a clearing, the rescue team rushed Rex aboard. Inside, the small cabin became a battlefield of its own. Dr. Hayes, the onboard veterinarian, worked quickly. She checked his pulse, her fingers barely feeling the faint rhythm beneath his fur. "His heartbeat is weak," she muttered, adjusting the IV drip. "He's going into shock." Liam sat rigid, his eyes darting between the monitor and the dog lying motionless before him. The beeping was erratic, too slow, too unstable. Dr. Hayes injected a second dose of antihistamines, her hands steady despite the urgency. Liam could see the tension in her eyes, the way her brows furrowed in concentration. The beeping slowed even further. "Come on, Rex," Liam whispered, his voice cracking. "Stay with us." The aircraft rumbled as they neared the veterinary trauma center, but even as the jungle disappeared beneath them, the fight for Rex's life was far from over. The helicopter landed on the rooftop of the trauma center, its doors swinging open before the blades even fully stopped. A team of specialists rushed forward, lifting Rex with practiced urgency and wheeling him toward the emergency unit. Mark was already there. The moment he saw Rex, his world tilted. His partner, his best friend, lay limp, his body covered in bandages and wires. The strong, fearless K9 who had saved him countless times now looked impossibly small and fragile. Guilt hit him like a freight train. The doctors worked quickly, voices urgent but controlled. Another IV was inserted, monitors beeped and flashed. Mark stood frozen outside the glass window, his fists clenched. "He's going to make it, right?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Hayes hesitated. "We're doing everything we can." Mark swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. Inside, Rex lay unmoving. The monitor's beeping slowed, each sound stretching longer between beats. Then, a long, drawn-out beep. The monitor flatlined. Mark's heart stopped. A crushing weight settled on his chest. "No," he breathed. He took an unsteady step forward, pressing his palm against the glass. Liam stood frozen beside him, his face pale. Inside, the medical team moved in a blur. They weren't giving up, charging clear. A jolt of electricity surged through Rex's body. His frame twitched, but the monitor remained silent. Again. "Clear!" Another shock. Still nothing. Mark's hands shook. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "Come on, buddy, please." Then a single beep. Faint. Barely there. Then another. And another. Mark sagged against the wall, his breath shuddering out of him. Dr. Hayes exhaled, her fingers still pressed against Rex's pulse. "We have a heartbeat." The vet team didn't stop moving. IV lines were adjusted, oxygen levels monitored. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time hope flickered in Mark's chest. "He's not out of danger," Dr. Hayes warned, her voice steady but firm. "But he's still fighting." Hours passed. The chaos of the emergency room faded, replaced by the steady hum of machines in the ICU. Rex lay still, his chest rising and falling with the help of a ventilator. His fur was patchy, his body covered in bandages. The once vibrant dog was now a ghost of himself. Mark never left his side. He sat in the stiff hospital chair, his hand resting gently on Rex's paw. The warmth beneath his fingers was a small comfort, a sign that he was still here. "You've always been stronger than me," Mark whispered, his voice raw. He forced out a soft chuckle, though it carried more pain than humor. "You kept me safe all these years. Now I need you to fight for yourself." Rex didn't move. Mark's throat tightened. He swallowed the lump forming there, pushing down the overwhelming fear clawing at his chest. "You're coming home," he whispered, determination settling in his voice. His grip tightened ever so slightly. "No matter what it takes." The machines beeped softly. The room remained silent, but Mark refused to believe this was the end. And so he stayed. The ICU was quiet, except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the occasional rustling of medical equipment. Rex lay motionless on the padded recovery bed, his chest rising and falling in shallow, measured breaths. The swelling around his eyes had started to subside, but his body still bore the brutal marks of the bee attack, patches of missing fur, reddened skin and faint tremors that ran through his limbs. Mark sat beside him, his fingers absent-mindedly stroking the soft fur behind Rex's ear. He had barely left the hospital since the night of the attack, refusing to rest until he knew Rex was out of danger. "Come on, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with exhaustion. "You fought through worse. You're stronger than this." Rex didn't move. The veterinarians did everything they could, carefully adjusting his IV fluids, checking his oxygen levels, administering medication to counteract the venom. Each day felt agonizingly slow, every passing hour filled with uncertainty. But then one morning something changed. Mark had been dozing lightly in the chair beside Rex's bed when he felt movement. A faint shift. He jolted awake. Rex's paw twitched, his ears flicked. And then, his swollen eyes fluttered open. Mark sucked in a sharp breath, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, Rex's gaze was unfocused, hazy with exhaustion and the lingering effects of the venom. Then, recognition. Rex? Mark leaned forward, barely able to whisper. The German Shepherd's tail gave the faintest wag, weak but unmistakable. A choked laugh slipped from Mark's lips. His vision blurred with unshed tears as he reached out, resting a hand gently on Rex's head. "You did it, buddy," he murmured. "You came back." The door to the ICU swung open, and Liam entered with Dr. Hayes, both stopping in their tracks as they saw the miraculous moment unfolding. "He's responding," Dr. Hayes said, her voice filled with cautious relief as she checked his vitals. "He's still weak, but this is a huge step." Mark barely heard her. All that mattered was that Rex was alive. He let out a shaky breath and pressed his forehead gently against Rex's. "I knew you wouldn't give up," he whispered. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. As the days passed and Rex continued, his slow but steady recovery, Mark found himself staring out the hospital window, lost in thought. The jungle had always been his second home, a place of adventure, danger, and unpredictability. He had trained in its depths, patrolled its winding paths, trusted it like an old friend. But nature had reminded him of a hard truth. It wasn't just the big threats, the predators, the harsh terrain, the treacherous weather, that could bring a soldier down. Sometimes it was the smallest enemies. A swarm of bees had nearly taken his partner's life. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples as he thought back to that fateful moment in the jungle. "I never thought I'd see the day when my toughest partner was almost taken down by bees," he muttered. Liam, sitting nearby, leaned back in his chair. "The wild doesn't care how strong you are," he said. "It just reminds you that no one is invincible." Mark glanced over at Rex, who was resting but healing, his strength slowly returning. He exhaled deeply. "Yeah," he murmured. "But it also proves that real fighters don't go down that easily." Weeks passed, and Rex continued to heal. The swelling had gone down completely, his breathing was stronger and his energy was beginning to return. But the attack had left its mark. Patches of fur were missing where the venom had done the most damage. Faint scars lined his body, a permanent reminder of the battle he had fought. Mark traced one of the scars along Rex's side, his heart aching. "I should have protected you better," he murmured. As if sensing his emotions, Rex nudged Mark's hand with his nose, his eyes filled with silent understanding. Mark chuckled softly, running a hand through the German Shepherd's fur. Yeah, I know, you're still the toughest dog I've ever met. Scars or not, Rex was still Rex, and nothing would ever change that." With each passing day, Rex grew stronger. His appetite returned, his tail wagged more, and soon he was walking again. The first time he stood on his own, Mark felt his chest swell with pride. "That's my boy," he whispered, watching as Rex took a few hesitant steps before finding his balance. Rehabilitation wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others. Some nights the nightmares returned. Mark could see it in the way Rex's paws twitched in his sleep, as if he were reliving the attack. But Mark was always there, reminding him that he was safe, that he had won. And slowly but surely, Rex found himself again. News of Rex's survival spread beyond the hospital walls. Local reporters picked up the story. Hero police dog survives killer bee attack in jungle. And soon, social media was flooded with messages of support. People sent letters, gifts, even paintings of Rex. Mark held up one letter, reading aloud, "Dear Rex, you are the bravest dog I've ever heard of. You're my hero." He glanced down at Rex, who huffed and lay down beside him. Mark smiled. "You're famous now," he said. "Not that you ever needed the attention." But deep down, Mark knew that Rex's fight had inspired people. It had shown them what true strength looked like, and that was a legacy worth having. As Mark and Rex prepared to return to duty, one thing was clear: they would never underestimate the jungle again. Mark met with his team, discussing new safety measures, better training for unexpected wildlife encounters, carrying emergency medical supplies specifically for venomous stings, and always staying aware of their surroundings. Liam clapped him on the shoulder. "Guess we'll be a little more careful next time, huh?" Mark smirked. "Yeah, and maybe steer clear of beehives." They shared a laugh, but deep down, Mark knew this wasn't just about one close call. It was about respecting nature and understanding that no matter how well trained they were still at its mercy. 1 month later, Rex stood beside Mark, fully recovered and ready for duty. Mark knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "You ready to get back out?" "There?" Rex wagged his tail, eyes shining with determination. Mark smiled. "Yeah, me too." As they walked toward their team side by side, Mark realized something. They had always been partners, but now they were survivors. And no matter what dangers lay ahead, one thing was certain: they would face them together,